committee, who, by the way, was a Democrat, a decent Democrat, Senator Inouye. And Senator Inouye said, with all due respect, I think we should go into that in executive session, meaning that it was happening, and it was that Chardy was right. And now we know a lot more about this, what we call continuity of government planning. Now, this is something that is absolutely central to my book. And for a while, I was thinking of putting COG, continuity of government planning, which is exactly that, planning for suspension of the Constitution if there's an atomic attack, say, or something like that. I thought that should really be the heart of the book. But there was always a problem because my editors it said nobody knows what COG is, so you can't put it in the title. But it is a very important fact that since the Eisenhower days, there have been people planning for just that. And because they are a secret committee, they have to have a certain amount of continuity. And Eisenhower arranged from the very beginning that there would be people on that committee who were not in the government. Two people who've been on that committee since Reagan reauthorized it in 1982 by a national security decision number 55. The two of the people who've been on that committee from 1982 up to the year 2000 were Donald Rumsfeld and, of course, Dick Cheney. Even though Rumsfeld at no point was in the government. He was a CEO of a private corporation, a pharmaceutical company. And at the end of that period, Cheney, for a while, he was Secretary of Defense under the first Bush. But at the end, he was also a CEO of a corporation, Halliburton, very big, by the way, in the oil development industry. And here were these two people not in the government planning for the suspension of the Constitution, and even more remarkably, in 2001, now they are in the government, and on a day when President Bush is not in town, the two of them implement the plans that they've been working on for more than 20 years. This is, I think, a very central fact about our recent politics, and everything about 9/11, I think, has to be looked at in the light of the very major changes that were brought in at that time, some of them later given a legal cover in the Patriot Act and things like that. These were plans for detention, warrantless surveillance, which we all know about now from Ed Snowden. That was planned for 20 years before it was implemented September the 11th, 2001.
And it hasn't been unimplemented.
No, and you know what? It's given a measure of authority by a proclamation that Bush made on September 14th of 2001, which was a state of emergency. Everyone should know that we are living in a state of emergency, and that allows the government to do all kinds of things it wouldn't normally do. But what is very interesting about this is that this was a power, again, these states of emergency go way back. And in the wake of Watergate, when Congress started looking into secret government at that time, they found that America had been in a state of emergency since the Korean War. And even the Attorney General wasn't aware of it. And so they said, this is not good. They terminated the state of emergency. And one of the post-Watergate reforms was the National Emergencies Act, which set up conditions for states of emergency. And one of the conditions is that if a president declares a state of emergency, then Congress shall, within 6 months, review it and either affirm it or terminate it. And that's a requirement in the law for what Congress must do. And how often has Congress done it since 2001? Not once. And a former congressman and I, back in 2008, just before Obama was elected, we said, Congress should do this, and the new president should not renew. By the way, each state of emergency now has to be renewed every year. George W. renewed it for all these years, and we said Obama should not renew it. and Congress should review it and terminate it. And neither of those things have happened. That is to say, Obama has continued to renew it every year, and Congress has continued not to do anything about it. And we tried to mount a national campaign, and one congressman said to his constituent, I understand the rules of the National Emergencies Act have been overridden by the new continuity of government procedures. Well, if that's true, then in at least one respect, essentially, the Constitution has already been overridden because a statute has been overridden by a private, no, I shouldn't say private here, but by a secret power. And this is a matter of very great concern to me. And of course, the warrantless surveillance, and I'd like to really emphasize the warrantless detention is extremely important consequence of what's happened. The surveillance has affected everybody, and now everybody's talking about it. But detention only affected Muslims, really. But right after 9/11, something 1,000 or more Muslims were detained. Some of them were tortured. I talked to somebody, an academic, who was rounded up and beaten so badly that he had blood in his urine. And this man wasn't even an Arab. He was an Iranian Shiite professor. Absolutely had nothing to do with 9/11, no reason to suspect that he did, but he was detained for months and, as I say, tortured. And, there's no fuss about that in the press at all, which really upsets me.
I wonder how much the fact that there is no fuss in the press whatsoever about any of these things, or for that matter in the Congress, has to do with the fact that the NSA has got blackmailable information on all these people.
Oh, well, they do. I have a chapter, by the way, tracing these powers back to J. Edgar Hoover. And there's no doubt that Hoover, who's here in this business without any authorization, in fact, he had more than one attorney general tell him to stop collecting intelligence on people and to get rid. He had a list of people who might be rounded up in the case of an emergency. And he was told flatly in 1943 by Attorney General Biddle to get rid of the list. And what Hoover did was change the name of the list. He canceled the list he had and put all the names into a new list with a slightly more innocuous name. And the same thing happened in 1975. Then they found that the Congress found that he had this list. They said, stop it. So this was post-Hoover, by the way. So the FBI stopped it, put the names in a different list. And that's the list that Oliver North was working with when he had very serious plans to detain hundreds of thousands of people. And I think I'm not sure of this, but I think that those plans and those lists are the basis of the detention that took place after 2001, and which is now used mostly, of course, for it's been deflected into detaining and then returning non-documented immigrants. But it goes back to Hoover. Hoover did that. I don't think that is the source of the silence in the media and everywhere. I think that that's my idea of the deep state. I haven't mentioned the media, but they are part of it too. And in fact, when Eisenhower first set up this COG planning procedure, he put Frank Stanton of CBS on the committee. So the media have been part of this planning structure. And I think there is a consensus that the media should not touch this material at all. Let's go back to, I would have thought it was pretty newsworthy that Congressman Brooks asks Oliver North, are you planning for the suspension of the Constitution? And Senator Inouye says, we can't go into that in a public session. You would think that would merit a news story. There wasn't one news story. The New York Times was printing verbatim all of the hearings, and so those words were in a back page of the New York Times. There was no story about it because it's part of the deep political system.
The only person I can remember talking about it then and subsequently is Ron Paul, who's very much an opponent of continuity of government and all this sort of stuff. But